My name is Tim Honadell. I'm the director of the international program at College of the Canyons, and you are at the International Forum on Youth. And we've had amazing conversations about things that might be issues associated with what it means to be somebody who's got to stare down the future. So it's it can be a little daunting. Some of our topics have been pretty heavy. We talked about some environmental issues in the last one. And upcoming tonight, we're going to be talking about sort of the future of what's happening with youth. And then tomorrow also, we have some panels, which are going to be excellent. We're going to bring the student participants in our events, and also later on the panelists that have come that are the professionals in their fields. And we're going to talk to them sort of as groups. And so it's a bit of our wrap up tomorrow. I think it'll be fun, those student panels and speaker panels. And then we also tomorrow have a presentation about mentorship in a high school level. And we're going to bring in somebody from Poland who developed an amazing mentor program. And I think those of you who know about mentor programs can appreciate how difficult it is to get them going, to get them keep going, keep everybody meeting and working and having them be productive. And she found a magic formula. So she's going to talk to us about that tomorrow at 11 o'clock California time. And then we do have on Friday a town hall meeting about comprehensive internationalization. Today we have two main presenters, and one is here now. One's going to join us in about half an hour. And I'll let Heather do her own introductions, but the format that we're going to use today is going to be, generally we have some questions that we've kind of talked about and thought about associated with this, and then we're going to take questions from the audience as well, and we're going to turn this into a really informative time. So with that, we are recording this, so you are going to be put on YouTube if you're here. So congratulations and welcome. And that's usually where we see most of the interaction. Is this event will be packaged with, introduction card and information about who the speakers are and how to contact people, and it'll be placed up on YouTube. And then faculty will use it in classrooms, professionals will use it for their meetings on the topic and things like that. And so we're going to talk today on right now at this hour about building a strong workforce. And workforce is a term I don't think very many people understand very well. I kind of cut my teeth on strong workforce in projects when I first started in the community college system. But I found that we spent a lot of time just figuring out what are we talking about, because of course everybody has a job, but that's not really it. And so this is going to be interesting. And so our panelist here, Heather Singmaster, I'm going to let you, Heather, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, what you're doing, where you come from, and not necessarily why you're here at the panel, but maybe why you're in this field, because I think it's one of the more up and coming fields out there, and it is spot on important right now, considering the current culture that we see students who people in the ages of say 17 to 25 right now, and how important this kind of thing is. So with that, Heather, I'll turn this over to you for a moment.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you for having me, and happy International Education Week, everyone. I work at the Center for Global Education at Asia Society. I've been there for 17 years now. We are a nonprofit organization. Our headquarters are in New York, but we actually have offices around the globe. And so we're an interdisciplinary institution that works in areas of business, policy, arts and culture, and then education. So our Center for Global Education is headquartered within our education department. And so the work that we've done has traditionally been focused on global education. And we really took some time to define that with people, stakeholders throughout education, both at the K-12 12 level, and then at the higher education level as well. And so I'll just quickly share that definition with you so that you have a better idea of what we're talking about, because it is very related to workforce development issues. So the definition of global competence is first, investigate the world. So we want students to be interested in the world and how it works, and able to formulate globally significant questions, because of course, every good project starts with a good question. But it also encompasses those skills of critical thinking and problem solving. Second is recognize perspectives. So we want students to be able to recognize that they have a perspective, and you may or may not share it, but really be able to look at both, and from that create a new point of view. And so this involves also empathy, and really being able to work with anyone from anywhere. Third is communication skills. So being able to effectively communicate, but with diverse audiences, realizing that as we become more diverse in this country, we really are always going to be working with people from different backgrounds and who have different opinions, but then also that you'll be working as part of large companies. And then important to this part of the definition is the ability to work effectively on technology platforms, because that's a major way of communication. And then last is the ability to take action. So really having advocacy, being able to apply what you've learned to make a difference both locally and globally. And so we've been using this definition to really think about, what are those skills then that workers need? And so I've been working on a project to create training modules for community college faculty to help them integrate these skills into what is being taught specifically in the technical programs, or what we call career and technical education programs. So we have a large initiative funded by ECMC Foundation that's allowing us to create these modules together with modules for students, to help students understand what these skills are, how they're going to be important when they get into the world of work, and then how they create a plan for learning these skills. So that's a little bit about Asia Society in our work.
Excellent. That's good. That's a lot about what that organization does. And in particular, I think, it starts with a good question. And so let's do that. Let's start with a question. Let's talk a little bit about you right now, and a little bit about what is the passion that has driven you to, or supported you to stay for so long in one organization, in particular in the culture of today, where people don't do that. Students want to move to the next best thing, within 3 years. Very different culture than my generation. So let's hear some of that passion that keeps you going.
Sure. No, and it is true. I'm a little bit of an anomaly in this day and age to have been in one place for so long. But the work has really interested me from the beginning. I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, very rural area, and all I ever wanted to do was travel and learn another language. And they did their best to give us those kinds of opportunities, but it wasn't why I really wanted to learn Japanese. I wanted to learn an Asian language, and that just was not offered. It was German or Spanish. So I learned Spanish. And then I went and did my undergrad in Washington, D.C. I really wanted to have that urban atmosphere. So I went to George Washington University and continued in international affairs. And then I worked for a little while at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, which is technically part of the White House. And so that was under the Clinton administration. And so I really got to see, what it was like to work in government. And I realized that the bureaucracy was not really what I wanted to do. So I ended up going to get my master's in Latin American studies, since I had the Spanish speaking background at NYU. And when I finished, I had the opportunity to work at the Council on Foreign Relations while I was there doing my master's, and learned a lot about foreign policy, and was really interested. But then this job at the Asia Society came up, and it was really about helping students to have these opportunities that I didn't have when I was growing up in Wisconsin, to, learn about global content, learn a different language, hone these skills of global competence. And so for me, that was, what I didn't have, and I wanted to be able to offer that to others. So the job has really evolved over time. I started out doing a lot of writing work, writing handbooks to help teachers with this work, really learning a lot. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, I started working in the career and technical education area and really helping those educators first at the secondary level. We've created 2 sets of training modules for educators at the secondary level around how to integrate these skills. And then the ECMC opportunity came up recently to create this pipeline now of training so that hopefully students can, begin in secondary school learning these skills and then continue to hone them through community college. And I think there's a big need for it at the community college level. A lot of times when you look at what's happening around internationalizing curriculum at the community college level, it's happening more on the humanities side, and you don't see it as much in the technical side. And so as I'm out there talking with a lot more faculty, talking with international offices, it seems like there's a big interest in offering this for students on the technical side, but there just haven't been the resources to help educators to do it. And so I'm hoping that these new materials we're creating, which will be available for free to any community college, can really help make these offerings available for all community college students. So it's a little
Yeah,
bit.
that's excellent. I can see your passion is coming out as you talk about it. And that internal drive for travel and languages and other cultures, I think is it just seems to blossom into people where you wouldn't expect it. If a rural area, you think you just do what your parents did and you'd be running a farm, but somehow that bug gets into you. And we see that with our international students. They have this drive to go someplace else to study, whether it's the United States or whether it's China or whether it's Europe, but they just have that internal drive. What happens, I think you pointed out really well, is that in a lot of places, educators aren't necessarily prepared to deal with that sort of interest. And I think you're right. The humanities have kind of grabbed the mantle on that first, and the more technical areas are catching up. And then especially at the community college level for degrees which are less than a bachelor's degree in time duration, I think that's a place where we don't spend a lot of time on comprehensive internationalization concepts in the classroom yet. So it sounds like the tools you're creating are really useful.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
I hope
good.
so. Yeah, and I think that, what we really stress is that, you don't have to overhaul your whole curriculum, but really you can kind of integrate these global pieces, learn about the backgrounds of your students. A lot of times they have, an interesting, diverse background that you can draw on in the classroom. But even if not, like just kind of slipping things into the curriculum, looking at one learning objective and adding an international component to it. And then having one activity where you bring in a global aspect to it can be great ways to start that don't take a lot of time or effort. So the faculty that are going through a pilot right now seem to really be grabbing onto that concept that, oh, this isn't as hard as I thought it would be. And I've always wanted to do this, but I just didn't know where to start. So sometimes it's just taking that first step and then, going on from there.
That's excellent. Yes, that boost,
Yes.
that little stepping stool that gives us a chance to see a little bit further of where we could be. So that's great. Let's talk about some of the questions that we've got lined up that are associated with this topic that I think you're perfect for. And I'm going to start with one that I think is really, it's a contemporary issue. It's been driven by our stay-at-home situation where, we haven't been able to do education the same way as we always have in the last few decades. And that's about digitization. And so we see that in academia right now, where we're all on Zoom, we're doing more online classes and stuff. And of course, the workplace is also right there with them. And it may be a lot less controversial we don't read as many complaints about not being able to go to the office as we do complaints about our kids are stuck at home with us. And so, but let's talk about that digitization of the workplace and how has the workplace been impacted by digitization, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think maybe the question is how hasn't it been affected in the workplace? Because it's everywhere, right? It's ubiquitous now. I did an interview recently as part of the project. We've been interviewing people about the global nature of their jobs. And so we interviewed somebody with the Consumer Technology Association, and she made the valid point that every single company is a technology company these days. Like everything you do, there's a digital platform. But there's a huge need then for digital skills for all workers. So everyone from frontline workers to healthcare to manufacturing, construction. I mean, home healthcare workers are using Alexa to connect to clients. It's ubiquitous. But training is also an area, I think, when we're thinking about workplace skills and how you're learning new skills. Training is an area that's really been affected by digitization. So one example I really like is that restaurant workers are being trained with virtual reality. So Kentucky Fried Chicken actually created a virtual escape room where an animated Colonel Sanders won't let you leave until you can demonstrate the correct 5-step process for frying chicken, which I think is hilarious, but that's the way that the world is going. And grocery store workers can complete online training to become managers, which then allows them to make a livable wage. But you have to have those digital skills to be able to complete those types of trainings and to be able to move up. And so there are about 30% of American workers that are digitally illiterate, who have limited or no skills in digitization and technology. And those tend to be workers who are at the lower end of earning spectrum, and they haven't had as much recent on-the-job trainings. So they may not know how to use a mouse or write an email or do an Excel spreadsheet. And that's across the board in all categories, including younger workers. So we tend to think of, younger people are all digital natives and they have access to all of this, but that's not always the case. And then half of Black workers need digital skills and more than half of Latino workers. So there's a lot of issues around this, the reason for them not having these skills, a lot of inequity. Maybe they don't have access to computers or broadband, or they had limited K-12 education, or they're lower income. So we really need to look at how we can upskill all workers, because we know that a lot of these jobs are being automated and aren't going to be there in the future for people who don't have these skills and who haven't completed high school or have only completed high school. We're going to have to upskill them. So we need to get them kind of a baseline foundation of digital skills, and then give them the self-efficacy and that support to get these skills. And then you mentioned, we've all been working, the faculty have been working from home. And so I think that's the other end of the spectrum, is that people who do have these digital skills and are working in these jobs where they've been online for so long, they're tired. There's digital exhaustion too. Online meetings are longer than in-person meetings. There was a Microsoft study that showed that the numbers of emails and chat messages have gone up dramatically in the last year. So we're on these tools all the time. So leaders also have to think about how to foster a more balanced work-home life that's going to allow for breaks while still encouraging collaboration. Because that's the other thing that's happened during COVID, when we've all been isolated because of the pandemic, is that there's been more siloing of teams. I know that's been happening even at Asia Society. Like, you're only working with your team. You don't have those water cooler interactions. You're not working across teams as much. And this is happening in a lot of companies. And this is leading to more groupthink, which is not good for innovation. Like, diverse teams are more innovative. Working with different people makes you more innovative. And innovation is really a critical driver of the economy. So I think that's something else that we need to look out for as we become more digitized.
Well, that's really interesting. If I can paraphrase a little bit of what you said, basically, social media skill sets are not digital tool skill sets. So you may find that everybody has a smartphone, and but that pace of change and the development of that skill set doesn't always translate to that work skill set. I mean, at one point, the whiteboard and the pen was the big technology improvement over the chalkboard. And that wasn't that long ago, when we were putting whiteboards in at every classroom, and we thought, whoa, this is amazing. And then we start thinking about smart boards, and and then people can't turn them on anymore, and we can't make them work. And we got all this equipment in the classrooms that frequently we have to call IT and ask for help. So that I know that in academia it's that way, and it's certainly, like you pointed out, it is that way. Employers are starting to expect a certain amount of digital capability or electronic manipulation capability that isn't something that you learn anywhere else except for on the job or in an apprenticeship or something like that. And there's not enough of that. We are leaving a lot of people behind, especially those from lower socioeconomic areas and from places where those values aren't necessarily drilled in by parents. So really good observation.
Yeah, no, it's true. Writing a tweet is not the same as writing a formal email to someone. If you write your emails like that on the job, you're not going to be on that job for very long.
That's very true. And if you need to get something accomplished, especially in a bureaucracy, frequently how you write the email isn't going to work. It has to be a more formal letter. And I know that most things are forms now. You fill a form out for everything, but and there's less customized letters that have to be written, but a lot of that was for efficiency purposes on the receiving end. The skill set still needs to be there. Your observation about the increase in groupthink is interesting. Groupthink is pretty dangerous. It can lead, like you said, to a lack of innovation. Entire companies can collapse. I kind of think of Sears and J.C. Penney as groupthink at the top management level. And look what happened. And so they're gone. And so it's and they were here forever. And we had the tallest building in the world at one time was called the Sears Tower, and now it's not. So it's I think you're right in that the service that you're providing to try to address that is really important. Let's talk a little bit about what we're calling the YOLO generation, right? It's like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go start my own company or dabble in the stock market or bake cakes and sell them on the streets or something, anything but sitting in this office working for you. And so let's talk about them a little bit. How do you think this major trend, this YOLO trend, is going to affect sort of what you just talked about, the ability to develop digital skills?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. And I can't say I'm against that YOLO mentality. I wish I had the, I've been in the same job for 17 years, but maybe it's time to quit and start baking cakes. I don't know. But it is a major trend. In fact, the New York Times said that that YOLO might be the defining workforce trend of 2021, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, both Gen Z and millennials are burned out. They want to go try something new. They want to work part-time, or they just want to leave the workplace entirely or pursue that side project that they've been working on, or just their dream job. So I think that mentality that we used to have of, you work hard, you pay off all your debts, and then you'll be happy, just isn't working for these generations. They want to be happy now, and they want to live life now. And COVID really made it easier for this to happen and this to play out by first, making that hybrid work permanent. Now I think we're just going to see that going forward, so you can work from anywhere, so you can actually travel and have that flexibility. But also it allows companies to recruit employees from other states or even other countries. And so that's really allowing for more diversity in the workforce too. So as we were talking about like groupthink, like this can be one way to get around that, is to be hiring people from a wider swath. So a LinkedIn study that I saw actually showed that women, Gen Z, and those without a graduate degree are more likely to apply for these remote positions. So that can bring more of that diversity into the workforce. And companies are realizing that these younger employees want more than just a paycheck. They want to actively contribute, and they want to have a sense of purpose in their work. I think we all want to have a sense of purpose in their work, but you really see that playing out with the YOLO generation. And they want a workplace that's collaborative rather than competitive. They really want to have that collaborative atmosphere. And so companies are now looking at ways to allow employees to set aside time to pursue passion projects, or to allow them to work on projects that are meaningful to them. I know a lot of tech companies have hack weeks where, for a full week, employees can just work on a project that they're interested in. But they're also looking at new benefit packages too, that appeal to these workers. So, more flexibility, loan repayment assistance is a big one for millennials, wellness benefits, additional time off. I saw that some Wall Street companies are just sending their employees on fully paid vacations. So they're really doing their best to try to keep these workers in their jobs, especially because 40% of workers globally said that they were considering leaving their jobs this year, which is a lot of people. And so they feel emboldened because, there are a lot of openings in many industries, so they can always just come right back. But they have a lot of employees have a lot of leverage right now. And so they're going to try to get these benefits that they want, and that can have an impact going forward. Companies that are trying to go back to business as usual, you have to come into the office and work these hours, they're going to keep struggling to find employees. And so they have to consider making some of these changes that are being pushed by the YOLO generation.
Well, yes, that's really interesting. That digital exhaustion, I think, is that you mentioned is one of the factors, I think, driving the YOLO generation out of the desk chair and into whatever their dream is. And also another thing you alluded to is they want more out of life. And so there's less compartmentalization than in my generation, where I had my work life and I had my work friends. I had my real life and I had my real friends. I had my family, and what were those relationships were, and they were three different piles. Sometimes they never even crossed. And it seems like the YOLO's generation is saying, well, no, I have one life, and everybody needs to be in balance. And so that's really very interesting that you brought that up. Since you are an expert in this area, clearly, with a lot of years of experience of thinking about this and planning for it, and especially since you're basically designing curriculum for teachers, what do you think, skills-wise, we are going to be needed by students in a decade that we are not even talking about in academia yet? So what is not being taught in higher ed?
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the points I wanted to make is that I recently heard a presentation by Institute for the Future. They're doing some really interesting work looking at the workforce in the future, and they did a global youth skills report, looking at work and learning pathways for 2030 and beyond. And so they actually have a youth toolkit, which I would encourage students to check out, that helps youth build their skills. But the way they've organized their skills is they put them in 5 buckets that they call 5 peak performance zones. And so these are the skills that they see as critical for future work and learning. And I thought they were really interesting because they align with what we're doing, but they really have this more futuristic approach. So I'll share them. The first one is to make yourself known, with skills for managing your reputation and identity. So thinking about, the social media presence, the technology presence, like your identity and reputation are tied up in that. And we're seeing, people making mistakes on social media that come back and are really, affecting their careers. So I think that's a really, it's futuristic, but it's also now. Second is to befriend the machines, to curate, create, and simulate our complex world. So all about that use of technology and how we're going to be working with machines. And then what are those skills that we have as humans, the creativity and the empathy that machines don't have. The third is to build your crew with startups, communities, and networks. We know that networks are really critical just for getting jobs, but also for moving up career ladders, as well as when we're talking about that innovation piece and moving away from groupthink. Having that networking ability, working within your communities, I think is, a good way to be more innovative. And then fourth is to make sense with storytelling, frameworks for action, and ecosystem thinking. And so that fourth part of our definition of global competence is to take action. So I think that fits in really well here, but storytelling is becoming such a critical piece of what companies do, especially as they think about being more equitable and think about being more sustainable. They're always trying to tell that story now as a way to market their products. And then fifth is to keep it all going with skills for caring, sharing, and evolving human capacities. So I think this, is that empathy piece. It's about developing a whole person or a whole child. So, in education, we talk a lot about social emotional learning. That's been in the spotlight a lot, especially with COVID. And how are we really taking care of both ourselves? Faculty need to do it, as well as students, and helping them to have that social emotional learning piece. So I think that's a really interesting way of framing the skills for the future and thinking about how they relate and interplay with what we've been talking about now.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think it segues in very well into the next concept. We had a fantastic speaker from Nepal yesterday who talked about mentorship. And what was interesting about it is because in Nepal, the concept of mentorship kind of has a different flavor than mentorship in the Western world, at least in the United States. And we think of mentorship as, how do I get ahead in my career? I need a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And mentorship in their world is, how do I be a better whole person, which you just talked about, that empathy, whole person, self-care kind of thing. And so let's talk about mentorship, because if mentorship is really such an important part of being successful and happy as a person in this digital arena where we're on Zoom and we're all working from home, how does a mentorship work? How does that ever happen? Are people thinking about that in your field?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually had the opportunity to serve as a mentor this last year for a student who was at University of Chicago through the Human Services program there. It was sponsored by the Obama Foundation, but he was working in international education, and so it was COVID, and he was living in Kentucky, and then when school started, he moved up to Chicago. But so everything was on Zoom. And our check-ins were really interesting because we did talk a lot about just the state of the world, his mental state. He's from Taiwan, so his family was all there, or is all there. And so we talked about work, we talked about different connections I could help him make as he was finishing his program and looking to his next steps. But we did spend a lot of time just talking about life and how things were going in general for him and his friends. And I think that is a really important part of mentorship, because it's not just about connecting to the people work-wise, but helping to develop a whole person, and helping to realize that that's an important part of your life going forward. And as you move forward in your career, you need to take care of yourself too. It's not just about advancing and working all the time, but really how do you take care of yourself, and how do you have a successful life, and it's a happy, well-balanced life. So I think that's something that leaders at companies need to really take into account too, and think about, how do we make these opportunities available for our current employees? They may be beyond needing mentorship, but how do we make sure that they have opportunities for self-care? Asia Society is actually really good about this. Like in the summer, we get our summer Fridays, which are self-development days, which I know is really, really valuable for people. But then they have a lot of different services available that we can take advantage of, like different counseling and wellness programs, fitness programs, things like that, to really encourage, because your workers aren't going to be very good if they're not happy and satisfied. So
That sounds like Asia Society is a very enlightened organization, and I'm sure you appreciate the remarkable paradigm shift it takes to move senior leadership in an organization from how do I improve profitability to how do I improve that happiness of my faculty, of my staff, or my employees. I'm certainly from the generation of, look, you have a paycheck, it shows up every 2 weeks. What are you complaining about?
right.
Kind of thing. But, and I don't think any of these things are new issues that you've brought up. I think they've been lingering for decades, pretty much, I think, since after Gen X started entering the workforce. But I don't think that it's ever been socially acceptable to express them and to tackle them, which kind of leads to another concept, because at post-World War II, a lot of people entered public service. They entered a lot of government. And then we had sort of the 70s where that wasn't so cool, the 60s and 70s. Now we have the YOLO generation who wants to do their own thing. Are you seeing a trend away from, and maybe an entire generation staying away from public service and government jobs, sort of like you did? You stayed away from the bureaucracy, even though it was 2 decades ago. You know, you still saw that and felt that. But wow, I mean, today it's like there's nobody coming in anymore.
Mm. Yeah, government, I mean, government is a tricky one right now, especially when people are seeing the gridlock that's happening in Washington, D.C. And it's either inspiring them to go out and do something and run for office. I think we saw that after, the last administration. A lot of people who wouldn't normally run for office, including a lot of teachers, decided that they were going to, take things into their own hands and actually run for office. So I think that, and then the Black Lives Matter movement, have made people want to have more social good as part of their jobs. And it may not be working in government, but it may be working at a nonprofit. So I didn't end up working for the government because I wasn't sure like what my role would be in that bureaucracy. It was just going to be too frustrating for me personally. But being able to make a difference through Asia Society and the work that I've been doing, where, working directly with teachers who are then working with students to give them these opportunities, I think, I feel like I have purpose in my work. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done and the impact that it's had on students. So I think there are other ways to do well and, work for the social good without necessarily having to go into a government job.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people feel exactly the same way as you do. And that's an interesting concept because let's say you had a wish, you had a magic wand or a magic genie in a bottle, and you could pick any one major thing. And I know you've thought about this and you've thought, man, but that's just too far of a leap. And businesses aren't going to want to do that. And so you don't push it out there. But just for the sake of thought exercise, if you could pick one thing that you would change about what higher education teaches, what would that thing be?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is to say add more global competence into every course, because I think it encompasses so many skills that are good for work, for employers. I mean, working on technology, but also communication skills. But it's also about being a good citizen, because it's about having that empathy for others, respecting others' points of view. And these are things that I think really desperately need in this country right now, where we're constantly, we're in two different camps and we can't see anybody else's perspective. I mean, you see it all the time, from anti-vaxxers to immigration to climate change. We're not changing our minds and we're not hearing the other side. And I think that's a key part of global competence. And, we talk about it, with other cultures, but it's also about people who look the same as we do, who don't have the same opinions as we do. How do we communicate with them? How are we more open-minded? How do we have empathy for everybody's position? Because you just don't know what somebody has gone through that day, and you need to have empathy for them. So I mean, I think clearly the answer is to have more of this global piece integrated into what's happening in every classroom, and that, it's not just for some students. It's for all students. And, traditionally it's been, way back in the day, 100 years ago, it was looked at as something that, students in private school would be doing because they may be diplomats one day. But I think we're way, way beyond that, to the point where everybody needs these skills, because we're so interconnected, and it can help you in work. I mean, any career pathway that you're in. We created this tool actually where it has the 16 main different career pathways, and you can click in and see all the different examples of how you use global skills on the job. So everything from agriculture to architecture to healthcare. I mean, just the climate crisis is really something that's affecting many, many pathways when you think about how you build a house or, policy around government. It's affecting everything everywhere. And so then we have supply chain issues, and 1 in 5 jobs is tied to international trade. So no matter what you're doing, there's an example of how it's tied up into the rest of the world. And so I think those skills are really just critical, both for work and for life.
I don't think you're going to get much argument from the people in this audience about
Probably
that.
not.
I'm old enough to remember when the debate was we should just be teaching the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and all the rest was up to mom and dad. That was parenting. And we've gone, health class was parenting, PE class was parenting, unless you were in a sport for competition. And, the lines were very thick and you didn't cross those lines. And so global competency, that's kind of way out there. Everybody talks about wanting that it's important in the education world. And sometimes we have some curriculum that's developed that has those elements in it. But I think we're still a little bit ahead of that curve right now when we're thinking about that. So I'm glad you brought up that global competency concept, especially in particular, that concept of empathy, because we have tended to lose that, especially in our bipolar society we have right now. Let's move on to another question, which was aligns with what our topic is here. And we've talked a little bit about it already, and it is sort of what's going on with the pandemic, and we have this relationship with technology now. And I know there's a lot of talk about, I can't wait till we go back to the way things used to be, right? And so what is your feelings about that relationship with technology in the workforce, and in particular in preparing students to enter the workforce? What is going to happen after the pandemic, in your opinion? Is a switch going to turn off? We're all going to go back to the way it was? Are we going to all take school from our digital glasses? And what's it going to be?
Yeah, I think this is an important question, and it's something that, within education, we've been talking a lot about, and there's definitely a lot of talk, and there was last year, and I don't know, as we've been going back this year, there's a little bit less of it, but really this need to overhaul the education system and not lose what we've learned during COVID. So one of the other projects that I run, I have 2 main projects at Asia Society, and the other is that I run a group of city education systems called the Global Cities Education Network. So we have city systems represented from North America, so from the US and Canada, and then also from the Asia Pacific region. So we have places like Singapore, Wellington, New Zealand, Melbourne, Australia, Hong Kong. And so we meet each year to talk about challenges in education. Usually they're common across all jurisdictions. And so we met earlier this year virtually for the first time. And this issue of not going back to normal, and how do we really take advantage of technology was top of mind, because across all jurisdictions, they were really focused on getting students devices and making sure they had access to Wi-Fi, but they really believed that going forward, technology and this hybrid learning is going to be a really vital part of what happens in the classroom, and that it's going to be some piece of online learning, but also at home learning are going to play a role too, because students are really learning everywhere all the time, but we're just not recognizing it. So I think that's something we need to do. I work a little bit with the Cooney Center out of Sesame Street, and they did a study of youth during the pandemic that looked at how they were learning. And they found that if given the right supports, students, when they're online, are choosing like how-to videos on TikTok or doing deep dives on YouTube. So they're actually they're leaning toward that learning piece when they're online. And so we really need to consider then, as education systems, what is learning, and move beyond this kind of false divide between, school-based learning and at-home learning, formal versus informal learning, and really think about an education ecosystem that's anytime, anywhere, and that we're recognizing those skills that students are learning. And then similarly with teachers in training, like thinking about the modules that I'm creating, we talked with faculty, what is it you want if you have these different types of training, and they want online, short, like 15-minute, modules that they can do anytime, anywhere, because they're all really busy. And they want to be able to pick and choose what they need. So really kind of, micro task, where are the skills they need, go and learn it, and then be able to apply it. And so that's the focus that we have. And then we've been also creating student modules for community college students that are similar. They're, engaging online, can be done on any kind of device, anywhere. We really thought about, phones might be how they're looking at these modules. So let's make sure that we can use them on phones. So yeah, that anytime, anywhere learning is important. And we really have to think then, how do we assess this learning? And then how do we give credit for this learning?
Wow, yes, those are some of the most important topics I know that we're talking about at College of the Canyons. And I know all higher education institutions are talking about it, you're right. And it is a little bit of the horse is out the barn door. You can't force people to only learn at the chalkboard anymore. So you're right about that. So let's talk about a little bit of something you mentioned earlier that was sort of a driver for you, and that's language acquisition. And so, in a world where it seems like English has pretty much kind of dominated everything, possibly because the internet is almost all English. And so let's say just your opinion, and since you wanted to study Japanese, but you did study Spanish, what language right now, if there was to be a language that was the focus language that higher education institutions should be leveling students up from their K through 12, what language should be the language other than English that we should all be learning?
That's a really interesting question, because what I would generally say is any language, whatever language you're really interested in that will get a student to learn another language, because just having language skills are important. It opens talk about empathy. It opens your mind up to a different culture, no matter what language it is you're learning. So I think something that students are interested in would be important. Yes, English is the language of business, so that's a really important one to have. Spanish is really important in the United States right now, just because we have so many people speaking it on a daily basis. I was just in Florida last week, and I heard a lot of Spanish. I use my Spanish, which I don't get to do a lot in Portland, Oregon, where I live. But I have an 11-year-old son, and he is in Chinese immersion here in Portland. And we chose to put him in Chinese immersion because it's such a difficult language to learn. And they say once you learn a first language, it's really easy to pick up languages after that. And I tried to learn Chinese when I was in my 30s, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't hear the tones in the way that you need to learn it. So we wanted him to learn that from an early age, and then realizing that he'll be able to pick up other languages much more easily after that. So that's a bit of a convoluted response. I don't think there's really one answer. I think it depends on where you're at too. Being in a place where there's a large population of people speaking a certain language, like it could be Somali in Minnesota, it could be Spanish in California. It really just depends on where you are, and what, trying to align that to the local workforce needs too is really important. So as a college, you could survey your local employers and see if there's a lack of language skills in a certain language.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as in locally here, our big demand actually is to teach English, because in order to qualify for ISO 9000 certification, in order to work for government contracts in the manufacturing area, there has to be a certification process, which includes interviewing your staff if they understand their procedures. And the requirement is that interview has to be conducted in English. You might have a very competent staff of people who speak Thai, but that's not how the interview is going to work. You're not going to get your certification. So there's a big demand for English. But I had never been able to find what is that opposing other language where there's that big demand, where wherever you go, it's that Esperanza of the world, right? Well,
Right,
good.
right. I know for a while when when I was in high school, it was Russian. And so I attempted to do Russian by correspondence where I was in Wisconsin at the time. And so a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison would send me tapes I'd listen to and then record my answers back and send them back. And I didn't learn a whole lot that way, let's just say. But that, that was the focus. Before that was Japanese. So, and then it was Chinese for a while, but now we're kind of moving away from, things are complicated with China. So I don't know how long that's going to be the it language, but yeah, it varies by generation too, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Let's come back to some faculty issues a little bit, because the services that you've created at the Age of Society that is available for faculty are important. But faculty do have a lot of autonomy at all higher education institutions, and they have a lot of other priorities, and they have a lot of regulatory pressures to meet certain requirements in order to maintain accreditation and stuff. What can you talk about a little bit around motivating faculty to introduce these concepts, especially like the one you mentioned of global competency issues, into the curriculum? Like what besides, I wish, and you mentioned this, a lot of faculty say, gosh, I've always wanted this. I got my step stool, I can see it now. But what about the rest of them?
Mm-hmm.
How do we bring the other 90% along with us here?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I think they want their students to be successful. So I think part of it is making the case that these skills are really important. They're skills that employers want. I mean, we've looked at different surveys of what HR managers and CEOs want, and these skills of global cultural competence are right up there at the top. Oftentimes, they want people who can work with people who have different viewpoints, thinking about innovation and moving away from groupthink. You want to have diverse workforce, but they have to be able to get along with each other and work on teams together. So I think making that case to faculty that these skills are easily integrated into what they're teaching, and it's not a huge undertaking to integrate them in, which is what we really stress in these modules. Start with one learning objective, start with one assignment, and then build up from there. But even that one assignment can have an impact. But then showing them that these are the skills that local business want. And so I think, we've done that. We wrote a white paper that lays this case out and shows, all these different surveys. We've done lots of interviews with different people, from Walmart to Ford Motor Company to local electric company people, just showing how they're using these skills on a day-to-day basis and talking about how critical they are. So I think we have to really show that, this is a benefit to their students. It's a benefit to their programs. And it's also a benefit to campuses in terms of bringing more diversity onto campus. If you have more classrooms that are open to empathy, that are open to diversity, that are bringing in these global issues, diverse students are going to feel more comfortable there. They're going to stay through their program. So I think that it's kind of a win-win-win for everyone.
Yeah, that's well stated. And there's some models for change out there, sort of some older ones, the push-pull model, what pushes faculty into doing it, and then what, from internal, and then what kind of pulls them into it. And then there's some models around fuel and friction, which are new models that I'm seeing in the literature. And that's what you're talking about, is that fuel, that like, here's the benefits, here's the evidence that it shows that it works, here's why you're going to benefit from it, those sort of things. And I think maybe the next step is going to be, how do we eliminate those frictions? And that might be, once it's done a first time in a certain system, like in the community college system, perhaps in the history department for one class, once it's done, then that curriculum gets spread throughout the entire state. And that might be a way to reduce the friction. So that's good. I like that. We have another question that's come up that is related to what you alluded to before, about people learn from different places, mm-hmm. and how to assess that learning. And so let's ask the question, or let's talk a little bit about what what role will work-based learning play in demonstrating that workplace learning? How important is that going to be kind of in the near future? Am I making sense with that question?
Yeah, I mean, specifically like work-based learning and the role. Well, for me, I think that work-based learning is just really critical for helping students to learn these employability or soft skills. I don't like the term soft skills, but everybody uses it. But so actually, a few years ago, I traveled to Switzerland and looked at their work-based learning system, which is their apprenticeship system, which is pretty famous around the world. It's one of the strongest work-based learning systems in the world. And people outside of that system sometimes criticize it by saying, they're pushing students into their jobs at the age of 15, which is too young. But that's not really what happens. What the system wants is for students to learn these employability skills, which are best learned on the job. And so they may go into that field that they did their apprenticeship in, but they may not. There's this really good system of kind of on and off ramps that the Swiss have created where you can do your apprenticeship and you can still go to college. You could also go directly into work, but then you can come back and you can learn more skills. So they're constantly like upskilling their workers, throughout their lifetime. And so I think that work-based learning provides them that really good baseline where they get these skills that really will serve them the rest of their life, no matter what job they do. So, as we're part of the modules that I've created for faculty are to really encourage them to do work-based learning and to have a really good partnership with local industry so that they can align their classroom and work-based learning environments. So that ensures equal access, representative curriculum, and then equal opportunities for students to really learn about these global connections in their local business and industry. And I think part of that too is then making sure that those opportunities really reflect what work looks like today. So thinking about that online hybrid workplace that we're entering, that's probably here to stay. And so one example I really like and that we feature in the modules actually is from the California International Trade Center. They have a global virtual program internship, which is a remote online internship where students have online training and they do remote teamwork on behalf of businesses. They also have faculty externships too, which I think is really great for faculty to have that same experience. But for, one example is that some students participating in the program worked with global e-commerce companies and created Google ad campaigns targeted at potential customers. So that gave students that international digital marketing experience, which they could do from home as a remote internship. So that also just gives more access to people who may, be doing their community college classes, but also working a full-time job, but they want to have this opportunity to have some type of apprenticeship in the area they want to enter. So having this more flexible online opportunity is really important for that reason too.
That's what you just talked about is particularly interesting because I think most people think of workplace learning as say on-the-job technical skills that somehow you get college credit for. And you just explained that workplace learning is a lot about developing those soft skills. And I also don't like that, but we don't have another choice.
Right.
Develop those soft skills, which are right now, every employer is telling us in our community in the Santa Cruz Valley that soft skills are the #1 barrier to success for early entry, for people who are entering into their careers at the early level. And so that's fascinating that's what could be accomplished. You could, like you said, there's off ramps. You could leave plumbing or automobile service and go do psychology or international relations, but you take those soft skills that you learned with you. That's really good. So while we're talking about sort of that, those soft skills, and we don't really like that term very much, but there must be something that you're feeling so the economy is recovering and they're calling it this K-shaped recovery.
Mm-hmm.
That means there's the bottom of the K means people are being left behind. Something is being left behind. Maybe all the people are migrating to the other part of the curve. But those soft skills, how important are those soft skills in making sure that you don't get at the bottom of the K, but you get to jump into the upper part of the K?
Yeah, I mean, in the K, this K-shaped economy is really kind of a new, just in the last year, this has come out, because usually with recessions, we see like a V-shaped or a U-shaped or a horrible L-shaped return, which you don't want to see, where everything's lower. But yeah, the K-shaped, and when you look at the jobs that are the top part of the K, I don't know how to do this on the Zoom, but those are the ones that are the knowledge economy jobs, that are the technology, the software development, but also retail. I mean, Walmart and Target just came out with their earnings over the last 2 days, and they're just like through the roof. So those areas are recovering more quickly than others, which when you look at the ones that aren't recovering as quickly, it's hospitality, tourism, food. So those are the jobs that can easily be automated as well. And those are the people who are at those lower income brackets. And so employment is stagnating for those. Those jobs aren't coming back, or they're being automated. You saw that a lot in the food service industry, when people not going out, fast food just started automating all those jobs. So there's not jobs to return to. And so we're seeing this worsening racial wealth gap. And then, it's just, for those people who are on that bottom part of the K, they're open to long-term financial hardships. Whereas those on the upper part, they have stocks and they have houses, and they're just, making a lot of money right now. So it's really just widening that inequity gap. And then I think the other point with the K economy is that there are a lot of corporate monopolies that are happening right now. Zoom, where we all are right now, is a really good example. But then also there is huge growth for tech companies like Apple and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft, but smaller to medium-sized companies, which we have to remember employ a sizable portion of the workforce, like 44%. They didn't grow nearly as much during COVID. And it was especially true for minority-owned businesses. So as these larger monopolistic companies continue to automate jobs, it's going to be increased inequality. And so a lot of people are in this gig economy where they're working for Uber or DoorDash, which, managed by algorithms, not people. When you think about it, like, I have a person who's overseeing my work and who knows what I'm doing. And so that's who I go to if I want to talk about promotions or advancement. You can't do that if you're working for an app or an algorithm, right? It's really hard to do. So we need to really, the people in these jobs need those soft skills so that they can move up. I mean, there are other skills that they need as well, but having those soft skills and those people skills can help them move into that more knowledge economy. And I think I'm hopeful that, the infrastructure bill can help by creating more jobs to replace a lot of these jobs that are being automated. And then they're talking next about a social spending bill, which, if that had something like free preschool and free community college, which kind of got dropped out of the other bills, that could help workers with childcare issues so they can, go pursue other jobs or training. It can train more workers for the knowledge economy if we have free community college. So I think, those are some ways to think about how do we get more worker skills and upskill. But employers also are part of the solution too. They have to be the new educators and support their employees to learn new skills, give them the time and the support to do so. A lot of times they provide training programs, but they don't provide the time to do it or the pay to do it. So your choice is, do you lose pay to do this, or, and then possibly not feed your family, or does your work actually support you to do this? And I think companies also need to look at hiring practices. We have HR departments, but we have to remember that H is for human. And that speaks to the value of your company. Many companies have automated their HR system. So it's just an algorithm that's looking at resumes. And so that's a further disconnect between companies and people, their workers. And it makes it more difficult for minority workers to get hired. So a lot of these processes can be streamlined, but workers should be part of that process and part of that conversation. They're really a critical voice in all of this.
Well, that's interesting. So a little bit of to kind of unpack what you said, you just said a lot.
I know, sorry.
K-shaped economy, which is good. That's what we want. So that's excellent. But that K-shaped economy, if one wants to be on the upper part of the K and not the lower, soft skills are going to play a big role. And so staying on the soft skills thing a little bit, have you found that there are higher education institutions that are working on soft skill development as part of curriculum? Or is that something that is still outside of the typical curriculum mantra that you get in order to get your associate's bachelor's degree?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I have to speak from my perspective of global competence and the global competence work, and working a lot with career and technical education, so people teaching in the technical fields. And so I think they know that these skills are important, but I think they oftentimes see them as secondary to teaching those technical skills. So they want to first focus on those technical skills, get through the curriculum, and then if they have time, they'll focus on the soft skills. But I think there's ways to integrate that, especially if you can have team projects. Usually in secondary school, there are a lot more team-based projects and learning, but when you get into higher education, less so, it's more individualized. But if you bring back that team aspect, that more project-based learning, where they're learning the technical skills, but they're doing so in a more project-based environment, then they can learn both simultaneously. So that's part of what we focus on in the training modules. This is one way to teach these skills, where you can meet all your goals that you need to with the technical skills, but you can bring in these soft skills as well, because they are critical to first getting your foot in the door, but then keeping that job. We always say they're the skills that can get you hired, but also the skills that can get you fired if you don't have them. So I think it's important to teach both.
Oh, interesting. The dreaded group project, right?
But you have to
it
do
turns
it in a
out,
better way. Like, there are
it turns
ways
out,
to really
yeah,
good group learning, that's really engaging and interactive and gives students a lot of agency. You have to give them agency when they're doing these projects, and do projects that they're interested in. Otherwise, you don't just give them busy work to do as a team. But, there's ways to do that. So we focus a lot on that. Like, how do you do good, high quality projects?
yeah, I think that's the leap in improvement, has been what you just said. It's not just busy work to do as a group. And I think the dreaded group project is because of the design of the group project, not because it's a group project. And I think that's what was missed by my generation, at least. But you always wanted to stay away from those group projects.
Mhm.
So that's good. While we're talking about that, because I think you just mentioned it might not be something that higher education is actually teaching. And that, so maybe we're following, the US higher education institutions are kind of falling a little bit behind on that, and maybe they need to ramp that up. And we probably don't know how. I'm not talking about curriculum. I'm talking about accreditation. We don't know how to have the conversation about how do you put soft skills development, or whatever the right term is for that, into the accreditation component, because it is a big part, whether you're a welder or a philosophy instructor at an Ivy League, those soft skills are going to matter. And so that's good. And it looks like Mr. Forrest has joined us. Thank you very much. We know that what you were working on before was important, and we respect that. We're very happy that you had time to join us. I'll bring you up to speed a little bit. Heather is an amazing professional who is doing amazing work with the Aegis Society. And we've been talking a lot about the role of higher education in creating this to happen, and how does she get the concepts that are very important into higher education. And so I'm just going to bring you right into the next question here that's
Great.
happening. And it's a little bit of a softball, so which is good, but because you're just coming in. But I want to know, Jeff, what are you optimistic about when you look ahead at what our workplace will look like 20 years from now? And what are you pessimistic about? And Heather will have you answer the same thing as soon as Jeffrey's done. Optimism, pessimism, 20-year outlook.
20-year outlook?
20-year outlook. What are you optimistic about?
Well, I'm optimistic about the fact that many of the jobs that will exist will be jobs that will be customizable, in which individuals will have more options to be able to do jobs that they're passionate about, jobs that they love, jobs that interest them. And the reason why is because the emerging technologies and industries that are happening today, such as climate change, that's going to be a $1 trillion industry of no doubt. We need to also look at EV technology. That is another one. Also, let's consider cryptocurrency becoming an actual currency in which we can convert fiat to cryptocurrency, such as dollar bills into cryptocurrency. All of these industries are evolving and taking shape and taking place right before our eyes. And as a result of that, it's going to create really new and exciting opportunities for the workforce that's also going to be emerging and looking at those jobs and opportunities as well. So you're going to see more remote work. You're going to see more independent project-based work. I think we're going to see a decrease and a decline in what we call the 9-to-5 clock punching job. I'm not saying it's on its deathbed, but I am saying that that's not going to be the model that will be predominant 20 years from now. And so I'm very optimistic about that, because I believe that there is tremendous upside. And I'll tell you why, not just economically, but in terms of the planet itself. There's going to be more equity. So I see Africa coming online. I see India coming online, and those areas that have been often left out of economic boost and economic increases, I see them actually becoming more participatory. Now, on the pessimistic side, there is something to be pessimistic about. We really need to get our politics, geopolitical situation in order. It is the greatest and #1 threat, in my opinion, to the ability of us to really sustain what I call a democratic, economically viable and growing type of model. If we do not do something to address the divisiveness and some of the things that were happening, and I'm not just talking about American politics or a particular president, I'm talking about politics in general. We're seeing these types of what we call leanings towards fascism and totalitarianism that actually nearly bankrupt the world during the World War II period, when it was trying to come out of a depression. And so if we do not address what I would consider to be means by which we can tackle issues of extremism, that I believe, again, if they become the theme in which we live by and in which we message to one another, I think it could undermine and sabotage the opportunities for innovation, growth, creativity, and free thinking that's going to be really critical in addressing the issues of climate change, making sure there's food available for everybody, global poverty, and all of those things. So there is plenty to be pessimistic about. And, you know, I'll just say, you've been warned. And I'll turn it over to Heather.
I agree with everything you just said. And I agree with, what makes me hopeful. I think, that YOLO mentality we were discussing, and just the benefits that brings, and that companies really have to consider how they're going to integrate this, the flexibility, the work-life balance, giving people purpose in their jobs, I think is so critical. I'm part of a network of retailer organizations that are looking at these workforce development issues, and you hear them talk about, we need to give purpose to our workers. And so that really is hopeful for me. And just, people seeing, I think with, between the climate issues, between the pandemic, between the supply chain issues, people are realizing more and more that we can't be isolated anymore, and that we have to work together as a world to solve a lot of these issues. So I'm hoping that mentality can override our bipolarism, as Tim put earlier, of our society in the US right now. Pessimistic, technology is going to eliminate 85 million jobs. So we need to think about, how are we going to replace those with good jobs that give people purpose? Or are there other ways that we give people purpose in life? Thinking about, basic income, those types of alternatives to work, do those become viable systems that we look for in the future? And then we are going to be a majority minority country, so we really need to think about equality for our workers. We can't ignore the minority population anymore. We need to give them equal opportunity for jobs, and we need to set up our systems to be able to do that.
Wow, I feel like I just rode a yo-yo of optimism and pessimism. And I've had a few conversations with Mr. Forrest over the years, and I knew it would be global. And if there were multiple planets, it would be interplanetary when it comes from the way Jeff thinks. So I really appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about some little action item kind of things in our next few minutes. How can human resource departments, which seems to be where all hiring is done, even if the human resources is also the CEO and the owner, there's always somebody. But what can human resources departments do to address this YOLO issue and attract people into jobs that don't seem like there would be a job that anybody would want to stick in for very long? Because the jobs are still there, especially in academia.
Sure, I'll be happy to take that question, since I was in academia for about 18 years and served as recently at College of the Canyons. I think that one of the things we have to understand is this, that academia, in order to really attract and retain talent, as well as other industry sectors that are experiencing what we would consider significant upheaval, if you will, in terms of the workforce, we have to understand why those upheavals exist. That people want more out of a job than just simply a paycheck. They want a life. And so human resources has to really begin to connect with some of those things that needs to happen. So I'll give some very specific things and not just talking these generic philosophical concepts. One is, I believe we're going to have to find a way to provide healthcare. And not healthcare, but rather, well, I'll get to healthcare, but really childcare. Childcare is big. We need to make sure that those individuals who need childcare, that it is free of charge. That should be a benefit that organizations that are looking to attract workers should consider. And that means either providing vouchers or having healthcare facilities at their particular locales, whatever it takes. I really believe that's a strong incentive for individuals to know that when that employer is looking out not only for them, but for their children, that is a strong incentive to want to work for that particular organization. Now it gets to the second point, and that is healthcare. We've got to find a way to rein in healthcare costs. And so while academia in particular provides coverage for healthcare, we need to limit the amount of exposure in terms of the net pay that employees are getting. And so we need to see more matching, stronger positioning by institutions of every level to cover more of that cost, so that we can deal with the inflationary challenges that are embedded in healthcare. Healthcare has been inflationary for 30 years. It didn't just happen under the Biden administration. There's been healthcare inflation forever, and it's killing salaries and it's killing wages in terms of discretionary income. And the third item that needs to be taken, and that's what Heather alluded to, flexibility in terms of where to work. If it is not absolutely essential for an individual to be at the office, that needs to be made as an extension of a benefit for them to be able to work remotely. Now, when I say remotely, I'm not talking about from home, but from Hawaii or from wherever they may be in the world, so that they will have that opportunity to both enjoy life and work at the same time.
Wow. Heather?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with all of those things. And flexibility was sort of at the top of my list. And we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about that YOLO mentality and what they want and how they're changing what companies offer. But, I think loan repayment assistance is a big one, especially if you're trying to attract younger workers. They really want help with that. So that's a big one for them. And I'm not sure how that's ever going to happen with the federal government level. So I think we're going to need companies to help with that. And then, thinking about other types of wellness benefits I mentioned before, like Asia Society has a lot of sort of mental health resources for workers, and additional time off or paid vacations, things like that, I think are really helpful. But then also thinking about upskilling and giving workers time to upskill, like time to do training programs, not just putting them out there, putting them online, but not giving them the support they need to actually be able to do them. Because most companies do provide some type of professional development or improvement, but they don't give you the time or the pay to actually go and do that. So I think that's a big one that can, help with upskilling so that people can have jobs that they enjoy. And it's not just, the jobs that are being automated, but that's how we get people into better jobs with real purpose.
So we need to redesign some of the jobs, and we need to redesign some of the reasons why somebody chooses an organization, it sounds like. So that's good. I know that the healthcare, back when I was working in Portland, Oregon, I was championing the concept of childcare for employees as a way to solve the problem in the wafer manufacturing industries. And we were way ahead of our time back then. And now we fast forward 25 years later, 30 years later, and we're still talking about it. So I hope that what the two of you have talked about, for everything from loan support, I assume a lot of that is probably student loan support, and childcare and healthcare, and those are sort of basic needs concepts, a little bit beyond just food and a roof over your head. So that's good. We have time, I think, for one more question. And we have a question from the audience here, and I'll try to paraphrase it a little bit. And it's a little bit of a hybrid of some of the things we've been talking about. And it's not exactly on the topic associated with preparing the workforce, but it's a consequence of a lot of what we've seen around people who are working now remotely, and they're not going to necessarily be going back to the office. And how do you manage student learning and things like that? And there's this phenomenon associated with digital observation. And that's where, if you're a student, perhaps we know how much time you spent on the computer working on an assignment, because we're trying, like Heather pointed out, to develop these ways of assessing learning. Well, we also have it on the worker side, and sometimes it gets, I think the term was creepy, where you get these observations happening on the work computer at home, even to the point of screenshots, maybe even cameras turning on. We've all been afraid of this and putting our little stickies on our computers for years. But now it's starting to be a thing. We've got the old mentality of, if you're not pressing on the keys, you're not working. And now we have people at home who are getting their work done in 6 hours instead of 8 hours, and some that are taking 10 hours to get it done, the same amount. What do you see the future looking like around digital observation? Say, maybe in the far out future, at least the post-pandemic future, which I would lay out is going to be 5 years from now. The post-pandemic future, what do you see is going to happen around that in work?
Well, I see digital observation as part of a more broader scope of elements that will have to happen within the work world. And so it's not just digital observation, but it's digital observation plus culture, plus equity, plus flexibility, plus understandings and sensitivities to those who may have diversity, those who may have special abilities, all of those things. And so digital observation is contextualized within all of that. And so what I would say is this: those companies that build trust, and when I talk about culture, I'm talking about building trust. Digital observation will be a little bit more easier to come by, but for those that do not, it will be much more difficult, and it will be much more of a tension issue. And so I would say that digital observation should be something that should not be a first level of management tool for any type of organization today. I think building trust and building opportunities for people to do projects versus doing time is where we're headed. That is the new model. It used to be come in at 8, leave at 5, but like you alluded to, Tim, if I get done by 3, I should be done. It doesn't matter. The value of what I produced is the same. And I think companies need to speak to that. And I believe in doing that, digital observation can be a complement if you're evaluating the post product, not if you're evaluating the person. And that's, again, my personal thought, because I think that it would create some federal issues and some legal issues because it opens itself up to abuse, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't have a lot to add because the one thing I was going to say is trust. Like companies have to trust. And when you think about that YOLO mentality, I mean, they don't want to be, being watched while they're working. They're not going to stand for that. So, we have to build that culture of trust. And then I think the other thing is, people hypothesize that in the future, work is really going to be a lot more people as consultants doing a lot of micro tasks and a lot of projects. So if you're doing that, then you don't really need to be observing people. They're either doing the project and turning it in or they're not. So I think, that might help shift things too away from, if you're a full-time worker, then your company may have more rights to do that. But if you're a consultant for hire, then you can even write that in your contract. You're not allowed to tap into my computer. It's not a work issued computer. So that's where I would land on that question.
Well, that's interesting. Both of you used the word trust, and I think I suppose, now that you've said that, if an employee trusted their employer, and that's a big leap, right? But if they entrusted their employer, then any monitoring would be something that would be associated with, okay, what do we need to do to help make you be more productive or get your job done faster? Maybe we can get you out of here in 6 hours instead of 8, and you can, go for a bike ride. So yeah, that'd be really interesting, but that's a big paradigm shift. And of course, trust the other way is what we're really talking about, which is the employers trusting that the employees are getting their tasks done. And there might be different levels of skill sets and abilities, but that's the choice of the person who accepted the job. And so I like that point of view. We have time for the one last question, and this is going to come back to something, Heather, you mentioned before, and Jeffrey, you might already know about, and it's piqued a lot of interest on our chat world here because we are an academic institution, and you mentioned this thing called faculty externship. And wow, everybody go, hey, what? Can we hear more about faculty externships? So let's hear a little bit about what that actually is. What does it look like? And in what way does it add value to the ability of a faculty member to be able to produce in the classroom for their students in the future?
Sure, and having been a faculty for 8 years, I know a little bit about that just from lived experience. And the whole goal of faculty externship is to get the faculty out of the room of theory and into the room of reality. That's really what it is. And so that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but it's more than that. It's an opportunity for the faculty to engage an employer and to engage a nonprofit or an organization in a way that will lead them to begin to ask questions about what they're teaching in the classroom. What kind of curriculum are they offering? And does that curriculum align with what is happening and what they themselves are experiencing? And then it also gives them the opportunity to also meet with those employers or organizations to see what they can do better to deliver the kinds of competencies within their student learning outcomes and within their curriculum rubrics that would, again, be in demand by these employers. And so the externship is just a great opportunity to get out of the doors of academia and into the real world. And I think for too many professors, that's the problem. That's the problem. It's having to get into that real world because you may have to redesign your course. You may have to redesign how you present that course. That's all a part of the work, but it brings value in terms of what you're offering your students because you're actually connecting them to a life that they're going to have to be forced to live in if they're going to be relevant in the marketplace. And so I think externships are going to become more and more not so much essential, but certainly something that should be focused on a lot more in academia for those reasons.
Yeah, for sure. I think community colleges and others in higher ed really need to help support teachers to do externships. Oftentimes they happen during the summer. And for those in technical programs, it can just be a key way to get them working on the most up-to-date equipment. So you often can't afford to buy the latest and greatest if you're talking about some of these more technical fields, but if you can go out and learn on it and then help your students learn those skills, I think that's really important. So externships they also keep educators engaged. They, are really inspiring to them in many cases, but they really do help them then make those connections to industry that they can then broker for their students, so that students then maybe have opportunities to do internships with that company or to network with them for future job opportunities as well. So it's a win-win for faculty and for the institution.
Well, thank you very much. This has probably been the best 90 minutes of my semester, I have to say. So thank you very much, Jeffrey. Thank you very much, Heather. Really appreciate that. Everything that you've given us. This is the International Forum on Youth. I want to remind everybody that we're going to meet back again this evening talking about the future of education and with Brent Riffle. And you're welcome to join us there. And again, thank you very much. This will be available on YouTube, and that's where we expect to see most of the traffic. We hope to see this in policy discussion rooms, administrative meetings, and classrooms in the future. So thank you very much for that. And if Saab and Brent, I'd like to make a special thanks to them for all their work on making the International Forum on Youth happen. And of course, our leader, Dr. Jai Cheng Levine, who has done an excellent job at making sure that this all works out and happens. And Maritza is here too as well. She's been behind the scenes, sort of pressing the buttons and making things work. So thank you, everybody.